Yeah, okay.
Oh, okay,
I
got it.
Yeah, I see a thing that says Youri is recording the call, so yeah.
Okay, perfect. Okay, well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of One Plus One, your place for inconvenient truth telling and myth busting. And we are joined today by Glory Jones. She's a student, she's an activist, and she is co-host and contributor to Slow News Day, which does a lot of Julian Assange solidarity events, and they've had on lots of fantastic guests like Vanessa Beeley, Corey Morningstar, and past guests on this show, Whitney Webb, as well as Elizabeth Voss of Consortium News. Consortium News. So, Glory, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's great to be on.
It's an honor to have you on, and I guess the first question I wanted to ask you, because there's so much that we can talk about that I actually didn't even really write down like my questions specifically today. But
We do the same thing for Slow News Day, so it's all good.
that's okay. Good to know. But I think the first question I wanted to ask you is yeah, because this is definitely a topic I wanted to talk to you about, which was the events that happened on Capitol Hill. Trump's cult followers who literally stormed the barricades, and now all of a sudden everybody's talking about fascism and everybody's talking about the rise of fascism, even though Joe Biden, who's supposedly not a fascist, is president now. And everybody's talking about censorship and how like we need to and how we need to give Silicon Valley, the deep state, and the FBI way more powers than they already have now to apparently crack down on white supremacy and fascist websites and so forth like that. So the first question I wanted to talk to you about is I think we need to talk about why Trump's cult followers stormed the barricades, why such a breach of security even happened like that. Because I saw your interview with your with your co-host with Whitney Webb, who was a past guest on this show, and I really loved the two conversations you had with her because. Yeah, because number one, you guys are basically against giving more powers to the deep states. So we have to talk about why those Trump supporters stormed the barricades, because I think it's too easy to just say, oh, it's because they're deluded that dear leader lost the election and so forth like that. So the first question I wanted to ask you then is, don't the Trump supporters have a little bit of a point that this election was stolen from them?
They very much do. And I won't deny that partisanship played a big role in that because, there have been a lot of election integrity activists that have essentially been screaming about the illegitimacy of our elections for years now. And Trumpers have only now listened because it was their team that got screwed, because it was their guy that lost. So,
Mm-hmm.
from that perspective, obviously it's annoying to have to deal with that. But hey, now that they're there, let's work with that and let's move on and let's move forward from there. Because I mean, to paint it as this massive mob of all Nazis and white supremacists and brainwashed Q people, it's just it's such an elitist way of thinking, because it's as much as people got fooled by the psyop that is QAnon, as much as people did get duped by that, it's how much better are you to look down on them while you're still praising Bernie Sanders as if he's the second coming of Jesus Christ? It's just it's there's a lack of self-awareness with people who go out and criticize and call the storming of the Capitol a complete violent mob without realizing, like, okay, what are the things that got us here? Like, how did the duopoly move to engineer this event? And like, most of the people that have a problem with this event are the ones who enabled the duopoly by voting for Joe Biden, by pretending like all of our problems fell on the hands of Trump supporters and like a handful of independent media journalists that were questioning our elections. Because what's what's more dangerous as well about what happened at the Capitol was now it's going to be used as an excuse essentially and a giant smokescreen to be able to crack down on any dissent. Me and my co-host on Slow News Day, Steve, we were talking about this Sunday how the World Economic Forum held their Davos Agenda 2021, and they had a panel on protecting press freedoms. And one of the corporate empire PR agents they had on that panel, he said that what happened at the Capitol was a manifestation of what happens when there isn't enough filters on information. It's like that's how people are going about framing these events. And like you have independent media as well going around saying, ah, yeah, anybody who questioned the election, they helped stoke what happened at the Capitol today. And it's just like, really? Because now the onus is not only falling on people who you look down upon in such an elitist manner, calling them brainwashed, but it also falls upon independent media. So now you see people manufacturing consent for more censorship because by pushing election integrity to the fringe, by making it seem like it's just a QAnon thing, you can't fence it and be like, oh, I'm anti-censorship, but these people, they're crazy conspiracy theorists and they need to be held accountable. That's manufacturing consent for people to be essentially pushed to the fringe under the guise of, oh, they're QAnon, and then eventually censored. So that's the problem with this whole Capitol attack, is it's going to provide another smokescreen for the augmentation of the national security state. But what it's done, which is particularly insidious and very much emblematic of what a great psyop is it's got all these progressives that proclaim to be anti-censorship and anti-surveillance. Now it's got them at the forefront of this, and now it's got them spearheading this whole thing. So that's what makes it particularly insidious.
Yeah, no, it's crazy, and just to sort of go back to what you were saying, because this was such a crazy election in and of itself, because on the one hand you have Trump, this absolute complete right-wing shock jock, eccentric, carnival barker, and then you had Joe Biden, who not the brightest bulb on the planet anymore. So you had these two rival oligarchs. You had one who was depicting Trump as a Manchurian candidate, and Trump who was depicting Joe Biden as this social justice warrior and as this raging, flaming left-winger when he's anything but. And again, and I'm not like, I don't endorse what the what the Trump supporters did, storming the Capitol, but they do. But for me, I think they do have a point when they say that this election was cheated from them, because the moment Donald Trump, got into power, and because the moment Donald Trump got into power, the deep state was against him. The deep state literally, and the factions of the deep state, and that wanted Hillary Clinton to win, was undermining Trump and was doing a lot of undemocratic things to undermine him, and that's where the whole anti-Russia conspiracy theories came about. So the QAnon so the QAnon people were right when they said that there is a deep state, there is a cabal trying to bring down Donald Trump, and after all of that was completely debunked, and Mueller said, yeah, we found no evidence that like the Russians colluded with with Trump. Then they tried to impeach Donald Trump for Joe Biden's war profiteering in Ukraine.
And like Joe Biden is literally on video bragging about this. And it's like people think that it's some great quid pro quo with Trump. It's like, no, Joe Biden's on video bragging about this whole Burisma scandal.
What
and
Joe
like,
Biden did was the equivalent of what Dick Cheney did when he was the vice president under George W. Bush and they had the criminal invasion of Iraq, which benefited Halliburton really well. That's what Joe Biden and the Obama administration did in Ukraine. And of course, I mean, those were, and they actually did like, empower rival neo-Nazis and like anti-Russian, ultra-Ukrainian, nationalists.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
But God forbid, like a couple of furry cosplays come to DC and everybody gets frightened because, oh no, election integrity. And it's like, that's just, I can't even fathom sometimes just the level of stupid that's going around with people who saw, like, these people know better. They know better, yet they're still falling into all these partisan traps that were set by the January 6th psyop at the Capitol. If people saw through everything else that the government did, then they either A, fell for COVID, or they B, fell for January 6th, or most likely they just straight up fell for both, and now they're being complicit in the government's agenda right now, which is like, the real fascists aren't the people who were at the Capitol. Were there bad actors there? Yes, absolutely. Like, I go to tons of protests on the ground, and then whenever I go to Trump events, like, fuck the Proud Boys, because they're always the ones starting shit. And like, I always have my worst conversations with Proud Boys because they can't take the hint. And it's like, fuck them. But that doesn't stop me from talking to anybody else in that crowd. And that doesn't get me to generalize a whole crowd of people, because I also have some decent conversations with Trump supporters. So it's like, from that perspective, like, yes, were there bad actors at the Capitol on that day? Absolutely. But you can't use that to generalize a crowd of hundreds of thousands of people, because then you just get into dangerous territory. So if like 300,000 people are an extremist, how do you think we're going to deal with that? You think we're just not going to empower the FBI and the DHS even further? It's like, yeah. The most dangerous white supremacists and Nazis and fascists, they're not like, your neighbor with their MAGA hat. They're sitting at the boards of the DHS and the ONI and the CIA especially, and the FBI. Like, yeah, those exactly. are where the most dangerous ones are.
Yeah, no, exactly. And then on top of that, I mean, because even some of the best left-leaning people have been saying that what the Trump supporters did storming the barricade was a coup. That's what they keep saying, that this was a coup. This is a coup. Trump tried to plan this coup, and I think to myself, okay, all right, maybe there's a little bit of truth. I mean, there's no doubt that the Trump supporters want their guy back in power, especially because they feel like, hey, he didn't give us our wall. He didn't punish companies going over to Mexico and China, because you bastard Democrats have been undermining him with non-existent Russia conspiracy theories, and then you try to impeach him for Joe Biden's war profiteering. So, like, that's where I could probably, like, find, like, common ground with, like, a Trump supporter and saying, like, okay, you hate the deep state. Guess what? I hate the deep state. Let's abolish the deep state. But again, you have even the best left-leaning outlets and the best left-leaning voices who are, socialist revolutionaries at home and they're anti-imperialists abroad, describing what happened with Trump supporters storming the barricade as a coup. And I personally think, and I'm curious your thoughts. I think that the Trump supporters, were planning a huge protest. They probably wanted to storm the barricades, but the fact that the police let them so easily, go into, Capitol Hill and so forth like that. For me, I think that the FBI and the CIA infiltrated many of Trump's supporters, the QAnon people, and so forth like that. So, and I think they knew well in advance that that somebody was going to provoke something like that. Then they allowed them to storm the barricades, and now they say, "Wow, there you go, guys! You cannot have a conversation with Trump supporters. They're all a bunch of deluded, deplorables." And now, what we really need to do, if we want to fight fascism, is to empower Silicon Valley and the deep states. What's your take?
Literally in Los Angeles, like here in LA County, the FBI is putting up billboards, straight up asking people, "Hey, call this number if you think you can identify someone from the Capitol Hill insurrection." And it's like, the FBI doesn't need my help to identify people in that attack. Like, they have incredibly advanced facial recognition software and databases like Clearview AI, which, one of its primary investors was Peter Thiel from Palantir. Like, database searches in that company spiked from law enforcement agencies in just the past couple days after the attack. Like, they're already going full steam ahead with their facial recognition software. They don't need our help. They're just teaching us how to fucking snitch on our neighbors. And it's like, ugh. And I mean, yeah, I agree with you. Like, I definitely think there were tons of people in that crowd that were there because of Trump, because they wanted him to stay in power, because they genuinely believed that Trump would mobilize all these people and then, fight for them, like fight to ensure that their vote was counted and that the election was fair. And like, I can understand that, because I can understand a lot of people just, wanting to have some kind of sanctity with our electoral process. But, at the same time, it just sucks that, the figure that they all collapsed around was Trump, because, as much as it did seem like he was being undermined by the deep state, he was also very much complicit in everything he did. Like, expanding AFRICOM.
You've had Whitney Webb on your program. I've had her on my program, and Trump is all over this, this Epstein thing. I mean, he's buddies with a faction of the deep states.
Yeah.
There's no denying that, and I just think, if you want to explain to people, the constant, like, childish and dangerous, squabbles that go on between Democrats, Republicans, the Tory Party, and Labor Party, and similar parties in the Five Eyes Alliance, and and across the globe, is like we live in a world where we just have two rival oligarchs constantly fighting each other.
Yeah, no, literally. And it's like, even though, like, there's the perception that, they're different, that they're two different sides, but at the end of the day, they're all on the same team, because while they'll have their disagreements, they'll still collaborate when it comes to, any action that's expanding the surveillance state, any action that's going to foment more imperialism abroad and exploit Black and brown countries, or any action that's, at the end of the day, gonna harm the majority of the people who, aren't earning massive amounts of money daily. So it's just like, to play into that two sides thing, to play into partisanship isn't doing much of a service, because, like, we have more in common than we think we do. And it's like, and it goes the same way at the top as well. Like the elites have way more in common than we think they do. Like
Yeah.
for all the performance AOC is doing going at Ted Cruz, they worked together when it came time to warmonger against China. Like, and they both
Yeah.
stood up when Juan Guaido was brought to the State of the Union. They both stood up and clapped for him. So when it comes to imperialism, people that supposedly hate each other are all of a sudden happy to collab with each other. And it's like, it's disgusting in that sense, but it's also something that more people need to pick up on, to realize that this partisanship is just a game to keep us further divided. Because the moment people start playing into that, like the moment I knew that Trump wasn't serious about challenging the election was when he started going on about Hugo Chavez and how apparently the Venezuelans stole the election and how there was election interference from ghost commies. Like the moment him and Sidney Powell started going off about that, I'm like, okay, now you're just playing into more partisan narrative, so you're not going to get anywhere. You're consistently playing into this red and blue game that isn't doing the people as a whole or the issue as a whole a service. So from that perspective, I just wish more people would realize that and be able to see past the partisanship, because kind of whatever your ideology is, like I'm very much on the left. I'm very much anti-capitalist and anti-imperialist, but I think whatever means I like, the means to get to that vision, the means to get to, an anti-capitalist and anti-imperialist society, we have to use post-partisan means to get there, because everything else we've tried has failed. It's been co-opted. It's being surveilled as we speak. So we just need massive numbers and greater unity to be able to get there.
Before we talk about Patriot Act 2.0, which the now officially the Biden administration and their allies want to pass, I want to talk to you a little bit about this article that that Miss Whitney Webb did way before the votes were way before people started casting their votes. It was September the 3rd, 2020, and the title of the article was "Bipartisan Washington Insiders Reveal Their Plan for Chaos If Trump Wins the Election." And then the the subtitle was "A group of bipartisan neoconservative Republicans and establishment Democrats have been simulating multiple catastrophic scenarios for the 2020 elections, including a simulation where a clear victory by the incumbent, i.e. Trump, provokes unprecedented measures which the Biden campaign could take to foil a new Trump inauguration." And and then in the article, Miss Webb she was talking about how basically the deep states, those who support neoconservatives that hate Trump, and those who wanted Clinton to win and definitely endorsed Biden, were basically working on how they can usurp the election from Trump, and that even if Trump won, they were going to find a way to to again steal the election from him. And and again, this is why I wanted to ask you, and this is why I'll ask the question again: don't the Trump supporters have a point when they say that the election was indeed stolen from them?
They absolutely do. And I mean, the insinuation that any criticism of our election system is now suddenly, stoking an insurrection and, fueling the flames that are going to burn down Washington or some shit like that. It's ridiculous, because our elections they haven't been free or fair in my lifetime, that's for sure. Our elections are privately owned. They're rigged consistently by oligarchs and by corporations, and the owners of voter verification software are Silicon Valley backed like corporate PR agents that have their own partisan interests, believe it or not, because they're people. And and at the county level, a lot despite the fact that a lot of county leadership, they're not allowed to register with the party because it's county leadership, they still have a lot of partisan interest in their own election system, like Brenda Snipes in Broward County, the former supervisor of elections there. She was good friends with Debbie Wasserman Schultz, and when Tim Canova ran against her, they literally found ballots being taken away to be fed to alligators. And it's like they found that Brenda Snipes illegally destroyed 11,000 ballots in the 2016 primary between Debbie Wasserman Schultz and Tim Canova. And that's one of the reasons that led to her being fired. And even now, the new supervisor of elections in the Democratic primary, he was hosting town halls with Debbie Wasserman Schultz and being all buddy-buddy with her while ignoring her primary opponent, Jen Perlman. So it's like all the people involved in this process, they have partisan interests, and they have corporations behind them. It's all proprietary software. You can't find the source code for any of these. If they say it's open source and they don't give you the source code, it's not open source. You have to be able to see that. And they don't allow proper audits for the election either. Like in Broward County, we had about 18 people auditing the whole election. In LA County, they only allow a 1% audit that could barely be videotaped either, because they just straight up would not let a friend of mine in to record. So it's absolutely disgusting. Our elections aren't transparent at all. They're privately owned. They're not free and fair, because I didn't even get into the inconsistencies with voter verification software controlled by untested AI, or the fact that they purge voter rolls all the time, or the fact that there's also methods of suppression as well going into it, with inefficiency and long lines, like making college students have to wait 6 hours to vote, or not allowing former felons to vote in some states. Like all that just stacks of like inconsistencies and rigging. It makes our elections shite. And calling that out is now being lumped in with QAnon. And it's disgusting, it's cowardly, and it's just so lacking of integrity. And I can't believe that so many people are just letting it slide by, because if you want to believe in electoral politics, if you want to keep voting, then you have to fight for election integrity, because otherwise we're never going to get the right representation. You're never going to get the right people in politics. Like, at heart, I still have a little belief in electoral politics. Like, if we had elections like Venezuela or like Bolivia, then I'd love to vote. But the fact of the matter is, we don't, because the people in Bolivia put their bodies on the line to protest for free and fair elections. They had so many international observers come in too. Here, you can't even question the sanctity of our elections without getting called QAnon. It's gross.
No, it's crazy, and not only that, but actually, this is an interesting anecdote to kind of add to that. I was talking with a friend of mine, and she doesn't really follow politics, so I don't often engage with her on topics. But I think she was asking me, do I think? But we were talking about how we both thought that Trump was going to win come 2020. And she was saying because the Democrats don't have a real opposition and they're not going to give it to Bernie Sanders. And I was agreeing with her, but I was saying it's more than that. I was talking to her that the fact that they didn't find evidence of Russian collusion because it was all a bunch of bollocks. Like the Russians did not interfere in our elections to prop up Donald Trump. It's just not true. And I was saying to to my friend that I think the Trump supporters are going to come out in big numbers, COVID or no COVID, to basically give, two middle fingers once again to the establishment. And then I was talking to her about how the deep state was undermining Trump and used the anti-Russia stuff to undermine him, and she was saying, deep state, you sound you sound like a QAnon supporter. And I was saying to myself, QAnon, like, motherfucker, I don't even know about QAnon. I don't follow that much right-wing movements. I'm following what the Democrats are doing, and the Democrats and the pseudo-left keep digging their own graves, like, more and more and more and so forth. But the fact that even a term like the deep state, which did not come from, like, QAnon, that's something that, like, the left has been talking about for a long time, and, like, ex-Republicans who speak out against, the CIA now, they've been talking about, like, the deep state for years, and now all of a sudden, to even use that term, the deep state, you're considered a QAnon supporter or a Trump cult. Yeah, a Trump cult follower.
I know, like, even mentioning the Great Reset, it's like, mind you, the Great Reset was on the cover of Time magazine, and you have global leaders saying every other day, oh, we need a Great Reset agenda 2030, Great Reset. We need to take this as a chance to reset. And now suddenly, like, me repeating exactly what they're saying and giving my critique of it, suddenly that's QAnon. And it's like, me and Steve, we did a video breaking down the World Economic Forum's own videos and quotes from Davos,
on their own website too, on top
Agenda
of
2021. What?
It's on their own websites. On top of that,
We took videos from their own YouTube channel, from their own Twitter, and we broke them down again using the World Economic Forum's own quotes, and we were talking about that. Did not mention QAnon once, even though, and like, we joke on our show too. We didn't even mention it as a joke. Yet YouTube, for context, put up a big ass tag that said QAnon. For context, QAnon is a far right debunked conspiracy theory advocating for, like, cannibalism or something like that. Like, they didn't even debunk QAnon the right way. They just straight up called us QAnon, because it's like those corporate oligarchs are benefiting from the QAnon psyop too, because now they can just lump in anyone who criticizes them with QAnon.
I think we both can conclude that the Trump supporters, the Republican electorate, does have a point when they say that this election was stolen from them, given what given what your frequent guest and my past guest, Whitney Webb, has exposed, and the fact that, look, the deep state and the entire corporate media really wanted Joe Biden to win, and that in and of itself is a psyop. That in and of itself is a psyop. That's rival oligarchs using the media they own to propagate people to vote against this candidate, to undermine that candidate, and so forth. So no, I completely. So yeah, exactly. And so that leads to then this question, which is, can you talk about this Patriot Act 2.0 that the Biden administration wants to pass? Because they've been talking about giving more powers to Silicon Valley to censor people, to deplatform people. But is there an actual law that's being drafted right now by the Biden administration that basically wants to give more power to the FBI, the surveillance state, and to Silicon Valley to basically censor not just QAnon, but also slow news days, and who knows, maybe, like, if my show ever becomes more popular, maybe they'll, maybe I'll be on the hit list too.
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak to, like, what the actual House or Senate registry, like, what's going on there right now, but, like, the DHS has been releasing memos for the past couple years now, basically saying that we need to take action towards, right-wing extremism and, white supremacy and, putting forth solutions that doesn't involve them abolishing themselves. So that's immediately sus. But I mean, they've been gearing up for another Patriot Act under the guise of helping to fight right-wing extremism for years now, and it particularly ramped up after the first election of Donald Trump. And I mean, right now, it's like a bunch of people in Congress are just drafting legislation to try and expel half of Congress because there's legislation being drafted to try and expel any Republicans who helped stoke the insurrection, or like you have, empire PR agents like AOC saying we need to rein in the media. And I haven't specifically seen any legislation aimed at reining in the media yet, but there's also a ton of cheering going on for them when people like, certified punk ass Ro Khanna essentially just cheer on Twitter when they remove Donald Trump from their platform completely. And when he then goes on.
Sorry to interrupt, but can we talk about that a bit, about the fact that, look, again, I don't like Trump, you don't like Trump. I know that the audience of Slow News Days, and I'm pretty sure, I'm pretty sure the small audience I have, we don't like Donald Trump. Like plain simple, he's a rival oligarch. He's a con artist. He's a con artist of the worst kind. But I don't like Joe Biden. I don't like Hillary Clinton. I don't like Obama. I don't like all of these oligarchs and so forth. And the fact, but the fact of the matter is, like it or not, Donald Trump was an elected president. Maybe he cheated in order to win. I think Greg Palast is right about that. But in the end of the day, like, the Democrats Clinton didn't take him to court or contest him. So I guess he was an elected president. And the fact that Twitter can censor an outgoing U.S. president who's on his way out, I'm sorry, that's madness. It's pretty messed up that they already do it to Maduro and to the heads of states of other
they did it to Bashar. They did it to Bashar al-Assad at the beginning of 2020 when we almost went to war with Iran for killing General Soleimani. They straight up suspended Bashar al-Assad's Twitter account for a bit.
So it's crazy, and I think that's a pretty good introduction that this Biden administration, however long it lasts, it's going to be the age of massive censorship and deplatforming. So talk a bit more about some of the crazy ideas, because you say that, like, you haven't seen any copies of legislation that they're trying to draft to give more powers to Silicon Valley dissenters. But just talk to us about Ro Khanna, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and others who are championing censorship.
Yeah, well, because I mean, even without drafting legislation, like the Squad and Ro Khanna and all these other people in the allegedly independent media, they're cheering on big tech to do the censoring for them. They're cheering on platforms like Twitter and Facebook and Instagram to just, remove Trump from their platform. And it's like, bro, you don't think that's going to come back to us at some point? Like, I don't care what your personal feelings about Trump are, because like we've established, we both hate him. But if he's censored, then what can Twitter do to us? Like, what can Twitter do to independent minded people of color who are trying to raise the alarms on all of this? So it's just disgusting from that perspective to see so many people who would get hit by censorship cheering on censorship and manufacturing consent for more censorship to happen. And it's like, one thing about this Biden-Harris presidency is it's going to be, the age of censorship, but also the age of gatekeeping as well. Because
the age of what?
The age of gatekeeping. Because many people so many people are coming out of the woodwork to do the national security state's job for them. It's like, why do we even need the national security state to call people conspiracy theorists when you can now have the allegedly independent progressive media to do it for you, so then they don't even have to have an explanation for banning you? It's like, for anyone questioning the COVID narrative, like there's so much freaking vaccine mask police going around that if someone who questions the official narrative on COVID, like, you know, Ryan Christian from The Last American Vagabond, like when he now gets banned off Twitter for like the 50th time, they don't even have to explain why, because you already have so many idiots and gatekeepers calling him a conspiracy theorist. So, and you also have people like policing how you can do activism as well during the Biden era. Like, oh no, you can't pressure Biden. You can't talk to people on the right. Shut up, Bash. That's all this is. Like, I want to punch a Nazi and all that bull crap. And it's going to be so annoying to deal with. And it's going to be insufferable because people will be white knighting on behalf of the national security state like they already are.
You know, that's a perfect segment to another thing I want to talk to you about, which is the left. And I'm not talking about the real left, the socialist revolutionaries, the socialist reformers at home who are consistently anti-imperialism abroad. I want to talk about what the World Socialist website calls the pseudo-left, what Black Agenda Report calls the Black misleadership class, and you know, there's a Latino, queer, indigenous misleadership class, and you know, the controlled opposition, the gatekeepers, you know that you mentioned. And so I want to talk a bit about that, which is, first of all, why do you think why do you think so many of these supposedly left-leaning people are cheering on the deep states to censor people, to like police our to police like our thoughts, to police our language, and so talk to us about that. Like, why do you think that is? And then I want to talk to us about, like, you know, the kind of like social media vigilantism in which, like, you know, you can't talk to Tulsi and you can't talk to Tucker Carlson. But first, talk to us about why is the left digging its own grave and empowering the deep states when historically, once the deep state deplatforms Alex Jones and Milo and who knows, maybe Fox News and QAnon, they're going to come after us. They're going to come after the left.
Yeah, and I mean, like, they have been, and they already come after the left. And I think just to answer your question, I think to some degree, it's just like people purely being like reactionary and immature, because it's like, oh, ha ha, person I don't like got deplatformed. Ha ha ha. Let me, like, good job, big tech. Yay, more please. It's like, I think to some degree, it's just people being reactionary, but also I think it's just I think to I think it's just like years and decades of empire education and psyops that have just engineered people to be complicit despite thinking they're not.
Yeah.
Like something like QAnon makes people believe, like it kind of like wakes them up mentally, but then it pacifies them from doing any further action to resist the deep state, and leads them behind like a man like Trump who's complicit in their agenda. And like, you know, with someone like Bernie Sanders, you know, waking up a whole generation of people to activism and politics, but then ultimately sheepdogging them back into the Democratic Party. I think it's just a lot like I feel like it's just natural for people to put their faith into like systems and people, but the problem is that then brings them right back to where they started, to where they're in the same cycle of oppression despite them believing that change is happening. So it's like, and that's what
So
these
do you
what
so do you
these
so do you
what all
think
these psyops are for.
do you think people so do you think people like Bernie Sanders and Bernie Sanders supporters and AOC and and then TYT and then even like the best more sincere left wing outlets who are who are consistently anti-war and would never vote for for the Democratic Party. You think the reason why they're cheering on this censorship is because they honestly do think that, like, okay, if we just purge the QAnon type of people, the Alex Jones, the Molly Annapolis's, that's going to give more of a space for us, and we can change the world with our magic wands. Like, do you think like they just genuinely do believe that this is a good idea without even realizing that, like, dudes, you're just being chumps for the deep state because they are going to go after you next?
Yeah, I mean, I think to some degree, like, I genuinely think at this point that, like, some progressives do think that genuinely, which is, very concerning, and it's emblematic of, just the horrid state of the progressive movement right now. Even though I'm not a progressive, I'm still concerned for the state of their movement because it's horrid right now.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, I think for people, who aren't necessarily progressive, who wouldn't normally fall for something like this, I honestly think that it's just them falling into a partisan trap again, because so many people on the left, again, being convinced that the people at the Capitol Hill were their enemies, that they were trying to, conspire to kill every leftist. And it's just like, that's just not the case for that crowd. So, and, like, I feel like to some degree, their partisanship and their belief in leftism kind of pulls them away from, reaching out to the right and trying to realize, hey, that's not what happened. It wasn't an insurrection. It was more like a color revolution or a psyop rather than
Yeah.
anything else. So, I mean, I think from that perspective, it's just so many people fall into like these partisan traps.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. And let's also talk about the fact, I mean, yeah, again, I just don't, I just think it's just astounding how the left, the pseudo left, keeps digging their own grave, and I just don't see what exactly do they think their end game is. Like, do they just all want to become part of the Democratic Party and have really cushy jobs being spin doctors and working at MSNBC, or working for foundation places like Democracy Now and the Lannan Foundation or whatever Pierre Omidyar has, because again, like I mean, again, this is not only counterproductive, but this is literally counter-revolutionary what they're doing, cheering on the deep state to basically say that, like, every single Trump cult follower is a domestic terrorist, and anyone who says that, hey guys, maybe they have a point, is also part of the problem. It's just astounding, right?
There's a lot of stupid going around right now. Um, yeah, and it's just unbelievable. And it's like I want to shake these people and be like, do you realize that the most anti-revolutionary body, like, isn't your neighbor with the MAGA hat? It's not the furry cosplay at the Capitol. It's, the old white guy sitting at the head of the CIA, or it's the people who are basically, or, like, where did Nazis go? After World War II, they went straight to the US government. It's like that, like literal Nazis, like the OG Nazis. It's like they went to the US government. It's like, if you wanna foster, like, that anti-white supremacist revolutionary, like, oh, I wanna punch a Nazi, like, shut up, fash, like, direct all those sentiments towards the government, because that's where the most dangerous fascists are. It's like, and as well with these big tech overlords, it's like fascism as defined by Benito Mussolini is just like the increasing merger of the state and corporations to foment this corporate takeover by a few elites. It's like, that's fascism, and it's happening via big tech and via the Great Reset with the stupid idea of stakeholder capitalism, which is just fascism, but you feel like you're involved in the system. So it's so stupid that people would focus so much to the right that they don't see what's going on above them.
No, yeah, and on top of that, and then on top of that, the deep state is very much bipartisan. I mean, the deep state supports whichever neo-Keynesian Democrat who wants to install more Clinton crime bills, and then it supports Republicans who want to give more of the Patriot Act. And again, I just don't understand like how we went from a summer of uprisings, people pissed off about the murder of George Floyd and in general the state of affairs, and talking about defunding the police and now we need a completely different approach to and talking about social justice, and we need a completely different approach than policing our lives. How we went from that to all of a sudden everybody is cheering on giving more powers to the deep state. The CIA, those are mobsters, and they're like the policemen of the world, stopping and frisking the world. And the FBI, which wants to monitor like our movements, wants to monitor like our speech and so forth. So, I just find it mind baffling that that Bernie Sanders and even people who hate Biden are saying, yeah, we need to give more power to the surveillance state to fight fascism.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think a significant part of that energy at least comes from like the co-option of organizations like Black Lives Matter and Sunrise and Extinction Rebellion and various other organizations, because they initially began to kind of wither away and hinder that real kind of like anti-establishment energy that began with like the Black Lives Matter protests, because like the reason why they were so big is just because like it was a whole conglomeration of like anti-police and like just being so frustrated with the government during all these lockdowns, and like that real anti-authoritarian, like anti-fascist state sentiment just really came together. But then you have these groups like Sunrise and Black Lives Matter start coming in, and then they start co-opting it. And then when the summer ends and fall starts rolling around, then you have all those organizations saying, okay, we need to now focus on getting rid of Donald Trump. So before 2020 even ended, all these organizations began to focus their energy back into funneling all that energy into the very same system which fomented all of these problems to begin with. And I think that's something that the left really needs to realize, is because we uphold, maybe with Black Lives Matter, the co-option is becoming clearer and clearer, but with an organization like Sunrise, whose PAC takes, hundreds of thousands of dollars from George Soros's personal PAC. And like they've been very co-opted to a degree too. Like they've been so complicit in the agenda of the World Economic Forum, which involves literal deep sea mining. And it's like they've said nothing about it, and they've been complicit in it. But at the end of the day, that's what these oligarchs like Klaus Schwab want, is they want to use these youth movements to direct energy towards their Great Reset agenda. And part of that begins with these organizations funneling that energy away from the streets and back into the system. And now it's only going to get even worse, as that same energy is then going to be used to cheer on the crackdown on all of us via the Great Reset.
And before I ask you to explain to an audience about the great, about the Great Reset and the weaponization of, the weaponization of COVID. Uh, yeah, can you talk to us? Because I remember when I saw your interview with your co-host Steve with with Whitney Webb, I went to go check out your Twitter, and I saw a speech you made in Miami talking about the sad state of the anti-war movement and the anti-imperialist movement. And can you talk to us about why so much of the left has jumped the shark on on Syria and Venezuela, two great examples where once upon a time we had people saying no war for oil when it came to Iraq, yet Venezuela, that's clearly a war for oil and mining, and and you have so many people on the left who still support the Assad must go and supporting non-existent moderate rebels.
Yeah, I mean, it just, I mean, because one thing about progressives specifically is that movement has a whole white savior complex that they haven't properly addressed and moved to fix yet. So something
Mm,
like like the imperialist foreign policy of the United States really plays into that because it's like, oh, we need to save these brainwashed brown people from their, dictators like Maduro and Assad. And it's like, no, these people don't want us here. Whatever happened to their self-determination? So, from the progressive perspective, there's that, but there's also, I don't even know because it's like, I was born in 2000, so I'm kind of too young to really remember the logistics of the Iraq war protest that well. Like all I remember about them was that they were huge. That's
yeah.
that's the only thing. But like that's a question that I asked myself, and I think I even raised it in that video, was like kind of what happened to those massive crowds. And like I think a large part of it was they were pacified through the election of, Barack Obama. And like the anti-war movement, it was handicapped in the 20th century because they got rid of the draft. So now it kind of removed the personal
Mm,
cost that Americans had to play from war. So
interesting.
when that cost was removed, then because then it was like, oh, this isn't a me issue because it won't affect me that much. So that kind of hindered the anti-war movement as well. And then another thing I think might have affected it was the election of Obama and his escalation of the drone campaign, like this idea of, oh, yes, this is going to be great. We don't even need to send troops over now. We can just, fight terrorists from, some guy in a basement in the middle of Langley. And I think that plays into it as well. And just the impersonalization from war while also hyping up this whole human rights like scam, because it really is a
Yeah.
scam to advocate for human rights and human security, because all it does is it's used to manufacture consent to go to war with the country, because it's like, oh, we have to go to war with Syria because Assad gassed his own people. And it's like, okay, let's look into that false flag. Like, what happened? Oh, we can't see because rebels were shelling the whole area for weeks after. And then when the investigation finally did happen, the OPCW covered up so much stuff. And this was all after Trump just launched missiles at them without an investigation even happening to begin with. So it's just like it's just so this whole like the whole human rights paradigm as a whole, while it can sound like, very benevolent and very nice in theory, all it's been used for is to go to war and to foment even more destabilization in black and brown nations. So it's really interesting to watch like that shift in rhetoric and how that paradigm affects our policy, just because I'm actually an international relations major. So I had to learn about, human security. And when when I learned about it, my first thought is, oh, so this is how we're now going to war with brown nations. So, um, it's interesting to see how rhetorical changes have affected that as well, but also like the impersonalization from war and just kind of handicapping the left with the election of Obama and making them really like pacifying them and making the left think like, oh, everything's all right because our guy won, that kind of stuff.
Interesting. And yeah, no, yeah, no, very interesting what you said, because I never really thought about the fact that, like, yeah, I mean, even though wars cost everybody an arm and a leg, literally, and even though so much money, so much MMT goes into war making and and war profiteering and propaganda, the fact that we don't have a draft means that many people think, okay, yeah, wars are bad, but hey, it's not really costing me that much because I'm not forced to go there, and therefore, yeah, like you said, that impersonalization, I never really thought about that. So then that leads then to, yeah, can you because you mentioned yeah, because you mentioned the Great Reset, and can you talk to us about the Great Reset? And I don't know fully your position on the whole Corona virus crisis. I'm of the opinion that that there is very much a highly infectious disease, and I'm okay wearing a hospital mask because it's better to be safe than sorry. But what I am afraid of is the weaponization of coronavirus to silence free speech, to and to give more power to the deep state, as well as the fact that under coronavirus they are passing through more reactionary shock doctrines. So talk to us about the Great Reset and how the weaponization of coronavirus is kind of linked to that, right?
Yeah. So basically, what's happening with the Great Reset is global oligarchs have noticed that people are waking up and that capitalism is ultimately failing. So what they're trying to do via the Great Reset is implement, stakeholder capitalism, which is this idea that, everybody is involved in the corporate process, that, corporations are thinking of more than just themselves. They're also thinking of society. So therefore, corporations are now getting even more involved in society and more involved in government. And, apparently the people have a say because, there'll be like a Black person and a gay woman on, the corporate boards. So really, it's just essentially, like I said earlier, fascism that makes people feel like they're involved in the process. Um, and it's spearheaded by a guy named Klaus Schwab,
Yeah.
who was born in 1930s in Germany, who has a very nice transhumanist agenda. So to put it lightly, he's a eugenicist. Um, and a lot of the people involved in this have these weird transhumanist fantasies, and especially
And then also explain, if you can, what is transhumanism? Because Whitney Webb mentioned that to me, that Epstein and many of his partners in crime, like Bill Gates and so forth, believed in transhumanism.
Yeah, so transhumanism is basically kind of like a convoluted evolution of humanity where it comes where like where there's also like this weird fusion of like nature and technology. So what it essentially does is it kind of distances humans from our more like animalistic natures, like something like something like, you know, the need to interact with each other and the need to interact with nature and like our own natural immunity. Like it tries to distance ourselves away from that and kind of further fuse with the technological world and the fourth industrial revolution. So that's kind of what's really being spearheaded by the people trying to advance this great reset. And where COVID plays into that is because it's such, you know, it's such a jarring event for everyone. It's like such a jarring event for the whole world that basically you have all these leaders now saying like, okay, because of this massive event, we now need like some kind of shift, some kind of pivot, some kind of reset. So in comes Klaus Schwab with, you know, with a literal book titled COVID-19 and the Great Reset. And it's like I think COVID is real, and like I actually got COVID too. I mean, I'm over it now, and like, you know, I have friends who got COVID as well, and like it's like, so I don't doubt that there exists a disease out there, but my thing is it's now being used, like you said, as an excuse to further advance this transhumanist agenda, distance ourselves from our humanity, and really just augment the national security state as well. Like looking into something like Operation Warp Speed, which was, you know, supposed to give us a vaccine, a vaccine which hopefully I won't take, but I mean, it's it's like this Operation Warp Speed contracted a company called Palantir, and what Palantir did was it really spearheaded predictive policing and predictive policing algorithms, which were, and they also had contracts with ICE as well. So essentially their technology essentially helped ravage Black and Brown communities across the United States through policing and through ICE catching undocumented immigrants. And now they're involved in Warp Speed, or what's supposed to be a public health project. And it's like, we can't be concerned about it because, oh, it's COVID, you can't question anything the government says. And like with the vaccines as well, it's like, I don't trust Pfizer. I don't, especially when there's barely any access to the full trial results. And of the results seen, Pfizer has said in the results they released to the FDA that, you know, people with pre-existing conditions shouldn't take the vaccine, that older people shouldn't take the vaccine, and they didn't even test the vaccine on people under the age of 16. So that's already half the population that apparently is most susceptible to COVID that shouldn't get the vaccine. And then you have the own heads of Pfizer saying, oh no, you still have to wear a mask, you still have to socially distance even after getting the vaccine, despite that the government is acting like it's some magical cure for this whole pandemic. And it's like, from that perspective, it's insidious as well. And Whitney as well did a great job of covering this.
Yeah.
But the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, the people behind that vaccine, they have ties to UK Eugenics Society. And now because that vaccine is cheaper, it's now being marketed aggressively to the global south. And it's like, so now we're going to have the vaccine that has eugenicists behind it marketed aggressively to the global south rather than letting them handle the virus just the way they did it, because, you know, the global south actually handled the virus very well. Cuba handled the virus so well with their interferon alpha 2b treatment that they were able to send doctors to other countries. And it's like, if I believe that COVID exists, but if the government just got out of their heads and collaborated with the world and were like, okay, we're going to work with Cuba to make sure that the interferon alpha 2b treatment will be effective, or we're going to listen, we're going to listen to science. We're going to actually do some thorough research on the effects of hydroxychloroquine and zinc and see how effective that is for people, because it did work for a lot of people. And we're going to start, advancing and advocating for more preventative causes. Like, only thing that I took when I got COVID was I took emergency gummies that had vitamin D and zinc in them. And I recovered perfectly fine. And I'm feeling fine because I'm taking them now. So it's like, why not
like gummies, like
preventative causes as
they
well?
give you like special pills and like you just have to like chew on them or
Yeah, so I actually didn't even go to the doctor when I got COVID because I didn't even get it really that bad. I had like a fever for one day, which I just rested through. And then, I woke up the next day and the fever was gone and I just had a really bad cough. So I just like took some gummies that had, extra vitamin D and zinc in them for the next couple days, and like over the course, like by the end of the week, I was fine. So
okay.
I'm like, I understand that part of it comes from the fact that like I'm young and fairly healthy, but like at the same time, we should be advocating for more preventative causes along with that, instead of just trying to social distance the crap out of people, because as good as it is to just be conscientious of not infecting everyone, like all like the social distancing and the mask and the not being able to interact with people, like that's bad for mental health. Like kids not being able to see their friends is awful for their mental health. Like, the mental health in this country was already bad without the pandemic. Now you don't want college students to go home during the holidays. Like now you don't want kids to see their friends at school, and you want them to sit in front of a computer screen for 8 hours a day. And now you expect people and now you got people losing their jobs, and you expect them to still be able to pay rent and all these bills. So from that perspective, the mental health crisis has absolutely skyrocketed and exacerbated. And like, we can't ignore that either.
Well, before I get to the last two topics I wanted to talk to you about, let's just on the issue of of coronavirus. Well, what do you say to people who say that yes, Glory, yes, Miss Jones, it's awful that we all have to be socially distancing, we all have to be under lockdown, we can't see our elderly grandparents, let alone our elderly friends, because this is a highly infectious disease. Therefore, that's why we need to wear hospital max, and we have to see less of basically everyone and anyone as possible, because this is a highly infectious disease, and if we don't at least do this to get the numbers down, then we're all going to basically die from coronavirus.
I mean, to that, I kind of say just like, I don't mean to dismiss it completely by saying like, oh, it's just a flu, get over it. But like
Yeah.
looking at the numbers of who gets infected, and out of who gets infected, who dies from infection, it's very much numbers like the flu. And what the coronavirus does is just that I've figured from like, talking to people about it, is like it'll attack you where you're weak, or like if you have pre-existing conditions, then it'll attack you from that perspective. So it's just like from that perspective, I just want to say like it operates like SARS, or it operates like the flu would, because if your immune system is already weak, then of course it's going to hinder you, because any sickness does that. So you just need to treat it like that. So and that's kind of my nice way of going about it, just
Mhm.
because like I do understand that a lot of people have died from it, and I do understand that like there are a lot of people who have lost a lot of close friends because of it. So like, in just trying to be nice with them, I'm like, proceed with caution, but don't try and restructure all of society over this, because like it's not worth the mental health crisis. It's not worth giving up your humanity. It's not worth never being able to see your friends or see your family again. Like it's not worth allowing the surveillance state to have just a free reign over all of our bodies. So like proceed with caution, but don't police me over it, first of all, and don't try and become a gatekeeper about this and try to restructure all of society over this, because that is without a doubt not going to make the pandemic go away.
Yeah, and I'll just say that I think in terms of the in terms of the coronavirus, I think sort of like the way to kind of go about combating it. Well, I think when you're having such a highly infectious disease like the coronavirus, like I'm not against the lockdowns and I'm not against like the lockdowns and saying that like restaurants, bars, clubs, and concerts all have to be shut down, and kids all have to, stay at home and try to practice, socially distancing. And I'm certainly not of the opinion that wearing a hospital mask is akin to Hitler or Stalin pointing a gun to my head. That said, okay, if we are faced with this highly infectious disease known as, coronavirus, and we are going to lock shit down, then for F's sakes, like suspend the rules of capitalism. Don't say to people, you can't you can't open up your bar, you can't open up your hairdresser, you can't travel to see to see your grandparents, or you can't travel overseas or to another province if you're not going to bail out people, if you're not going to suspend the rules of capitalism and give people like a universal basic income, and making sure that like the doctors have all the resources they need to make sure that like they can take care of people once they are infected with with coronavirus. I mean, that's my problem with the response of coronavirus. It's that not only do they completely lock shit down, and they're handing out fines just because people aren't wearing a hospital mask, or people are out and about going to see a friend or going to travel. They then curtail everybody's civil liberties. Like, for example, in Holland, they're trying to pass a law where where they want to make the curfew 8 p.m. till 6 in the morning, and if you're caught out and about without a proper document, they're going to fine you 8,000 euros. So that's what I'm against. I'm against the reactionary shock doctrine, which the powers to be have been pushing since coronavirus. And then that's where it gets interesting when you look at Whitney Webb's investigation into how the powers to be have been pushing through more reactionary shock doctrines, and the fact that many of these people coming up with these like you mentioned, Operation Warp Speed, are all very dodgy people with with ties to the ruling oligarchs, the anthrax attacks, and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, yeah, I think like that's just the way that like even before I knew about, I did more research into COVID itself and like, all the lockdowns and stuff. That's kind of the position that I've always taken. And it's like we shouldn't be restructuring society over this in a way that gives more power to the people that helped make this situation as bad as it is now. Because our government absolutely like mishandled how to deal with this disease, and like now we're just gonna give them more power to let them do it again in the future. No.
Yeah, and apparently there is evidence. I know John Pilger, the brilliant journalist. He was on the RT program Going Underground with Afshin Ratanzi, and he was talking about how basically what he was saying was that before the pandemic hit, the UK military and the NHS actually were doing these kind of war games about what to do if a pandemic was to come about. So they knew well in advance that that something like this would happen. And instead of giving the NHS all of the necessary funds they needed to combat, a hypothetical pandemic. They either just fell asleep at the wheel, or they just decided, okay, we're going to continue privatizing the NHS and make it more like the, like the U.S. system, which I think is which that in and of itself is quite frightening, because the powers to be definitely did. I mean, if you want to give them the benefit of the doubt, they definitely fell asleep at the wheel when the pandemic shit hit the fan, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like, if there is and was an awful, awful disease, like there was a way to handle it. Just look at how Cuba handled COVID. It's like, and like, for all and like I'm from Miami, so I've heard like all the Gusano BS pushed out about Cuba. And it's like, listen, you can hate on Cuba all you want. Their medical system and their healthcare system, for all the sanctions and blockades and just like complete isolation from the West they've endured, their medical system is just phenomenal. And it's like they handled the COVID crisis very, very well. So like, my ideal thing for dealing with that would be like collaborating with them, collaborating with the international community, actually, like, and that's one thing about this whole COVID thing I hate as well, was because like to kind of dismiss any questioning of the official narratives, you had people going, oh no, the science says you're wrong. It's like, really, the whole purpose of science is to keep questioning everything and to experiment with your questions and then to share and spread the results. It's like science is never definite, and now people are all of a sudden acting like it is. Like, that was just one of the things with regards to gatekeeping that I really hated about this whole situation, was people going, oh no, you can't question the government, science says you're wrong. Nope. It's like
one of these days, actually, SND should slow news day should actually invite me and Jimbo of Mana Talks, and we actually should have a discussion about coronavirus, because I certainly do differ from many people, because I do advocate lockdowns and wearing hospital masks. My problem is that I just wish that they had given us universal basic income and kind of do what the Chinese did, which is suspend the rules of capitalism, not the crazy shit they're doing right now, where people can't pay their rent, can't pay their mortgage, can't operate their business because their business are locked down. It's like, okay, sorry, get fucked, or saying, hey, we have a highly infectious disease, but all you working class people, you gotta continue going to work, and all you people at school, go to school, and if you get exposed to COVID, sorry, you're on your own. And so one of these days we need to have we should definitely have a discussion about that. But then this is a good segue to sort of these last two questions I wanted to ask you, which is, you mentioned a lot about gatekeeping. And you mentioned a lot about how the left keeps digging their own graves. They keep they keep empowering the very things that they're supposed to be regulating or wanting to overthrow, the oligarchy and the deep state and the FBI. And yeah, so I wanted to ask you, this second to last question I wanted to ask you, which is, where did we get to this stage where if you go on Joe Rogan's show, you're considered persona non grata? If you're Tulsi Gabbard running for president and you talk to libertarian outlets or you talk to Fox News, you're considered a Nazi enabler. And heaven forbid if you're completely left wing on so many things, but you just question 9/11 being an inside job, or COVID was not something that came from animals, it came from a lab, you're just considered this crank that needs to be deplatformed and shunned from polite society.
Yeah, I know. it's crazy to me that more people on the left don't question 9/11 because like, you know, since I was born in 2000, I kind of grew up like right during the influx of like all the 9/11 propaganda and just like the never being able to question anything or else like you were the equivalent of Al Qaeda and like all the stuff that they taught in schools. Like they would be afraid to show like kissing scenes in documentaries, but like they'll show like buildings getting blown up in 9/11 documentaries in elementary school. I just always found that interesting. So it's like it astounds me that more people don't question 9/11, and especially because like me and Steve, we had Richard Gage from Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth on, and like we literally discussed nothing but facts and you know like how like there was no way that like building 7 and the World Trade Center towers could have fallen the way they did from you know plane crashes and office fires and just discussing literal facts. So like when you come at it from that perspective, it doesn't seem so awful to be questioning the official narrative on 9/11. But I mean, yeah, I just think there's so much that's being done daily to psychologically pacify people who could potentially be activated and potentially actually like go up against and resist this whole system. I think there's a lot being done by gatekeepers to, you know, make sure that any conversation we have with anyone we disagree with is forbidden, and you know we can't talk to anyone on the right, that's blasphemous. Like you can't go on Tucker Carlson and you know inform his millions of viewers about Julian Assange and make a direct appeal to the president to pardon him. No, you can't do that because he's a dumb right winger. Yeah. And it's like I can't believe that that's the state of people right now. It's just really like immature, and you know, I'm 20 years old, like can't even legally enter bars yet or legally drink yet, and like it looked very much immature to me to see people just shying away from like any interaction with anyone they disagree with, because that's what the establishment ultimately wants, is they want us to point the fingers at each other instead of at them.
Yeah, no, I mean it's crazy. And then on top of that, I mean, kind of going back to, to 9/11. I mean, whether whether the government did it, it's I'll admit it's not on top of like my my top 5 or top 10 priorities. But that being said, like why can't we why can't we question it? I mean, for God's sakes, like there's no doubt the deep state was involved in JFK's murder, Martin Luther King Jr.'s murder, Malcolm X, COINTELPRO, and so forth. And I just don't understand why why people can't just sometimes go, okay, look, we'll agree to disagree on that. Now let's get on to trying to free Julian Assange, or let's get on to trying to pass single payer healthcare. But this whole not being allowed to talk to anyone from like the right, like that's just batshit in and of itself. Because and it's curious how that's used. So, for example, so Bernie Sanders can do a town hall on Fox News, and his and the Sandinistas, and dare I say his cult followers, are like, oh, go Bernie, go educate like right wingers. Yeah, if Tulsi Gabbard talks to Tucker Carlson, or she goes on Reason magazine to talk about to try to pitch to them why her socialist reforms are a good thing, and why we should get and why we need to stop all these imperial wars. She's just like considered this crank, and that she needs to be shunned. And that's a whole topic that we probably should do like another show on in and of itself. But again, it's just crazy how the left, the supposed left, gets more angry at Jimmy Dore when he talks about a forced vote Tulsi Gabbard because she goes on Joe Rogan or goes on Tucker Carlson, Glenn Greenwald if he goes on Tucker Carlson. Like, they're more pissed off about that than the fact that, going back to the COVID situation, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ilhan Omar, they, say rest in peace to John McCain, and they work with the Republicans to completely redistribute the wealth and give more money to bail out big business than people that run a small mom and pop shop or a bar or a hairdressing saloon. Your reaction?
No, it's unbelievable because like it's plays back into like the cult following that Bernie Sanders has, where like, oh, thy holy Saint Bernard can't do no wrong. And it's like, hey, it's good to go on Fox News to talk about Medicare for all, but not good to go on Fox News to talk about Julian Assange, like not good to go on Fox News to talk about ending our imperialist wars and aggression against other country. It's really draconian how people's mindsets are wired like that. And the fact that they'll excuse their progressive heroes going on Fox News, but the moment it's a Tulsi Gabbard or a Jimmy Dore or Glenn Greenwald or anyone else, it's like all of a sudden they're like the second coming of Lucifer. And it's just unforgivable that they could ever do such a thing as, talk about Julian Assange and ending the wars to millions and millions of people. It's really, it's really insidious how that's gone, especially when you consider, like you said, AOC and the squad, they work with Republicans when it comes to, further advancing our imperialist wars. They work with Republicans when it came to trying to sanction China.
Yeah.
They worked with Republicans when it came to standing up for Juan Guaido as he entered the Capitol building in the State of the Union. Nancy Pelosi will rip up Trump's speech, but then clap when he says, "I'll never let socialism win in this country." It's like it's all theatrics with these people. Like, they don't care. It just shows that they don't care about the issues at hand. They just care about their feelings and how they can best advance their brand. Because AOC, even though she doesn't take corporate PAC money, she sure profits a hell of a lot from her brand. And same thing with the rest of the squad and all these progressives. It's like I used to say, what's the point of not taking corporate PAC money if you're just going to sell out for free? But they're not even selling out for free because they profit so much from their brands, from this whole progressive brands of ecosystem where you can just throw out the words Medicare for all and Green New Deal, and suddenly you have a bunch of gullible children giving you all their money and hours for phone banking. It's disgusting, and I can't believe that it's the state that we're in. So, that's what we try to do, is just kind of like try to de-sheepdog people out of that system.
And then I think in closing, the final thing I want to talk to you about, and I'm definitely going to have to get you back on the show because I actually do want to talk to you about Tulsi Gabbard and Bernie Sanders, because yeah, like everything you just said, I completely agree with you on that. But that's probably going to take too much time if we get deeper into that. But then, okay, the future. I think the future looks, sort of in closing, I think the future looks very bleak for our people power movement. I just don't see it advancing at all because, number one, the one person who was a real challenge to the system, even though he wasn't like, some revolutionary Marxist, but he definitely was going to, push back against, the endless shock doctrines, was Bernie Sanders. And he was cheated, in the primaries back in 2016, and there were millions of people, his own delegates were protesting on the floor of the DNC, and there are billions of people outside protesting in solidarity for Bernie. And what does he do? He tells them to not only vote for Hillary Clinton, but then he covers up the cheating by not supporting the DNC lawsuit and then saying, yes, the Russians meddled in our elections. And the fact that he said that, like, yeah, Russian bots are trying to, are trying to sow discord among us, and Russia stop meddling in our elections. So this is what happens. And then all of a sudden, popular anger at the system gets co-opted to people saying, yeah, I hate Joe Biden. Yeah, I hate Hillary Clinton, but I hate Donald Trump more, so I'm going to continue to vote for Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden, even though they're part of the problem. So you have that. And then again, I was so shocked at the hatred towards Jimmy Dore when he talked about, when he had his whole force the vote thing. And then on top of that, you have wonderful journalists and truth tellers like Whitney Webb, and I can't even find her on even the best left leaning websites doing interviews.
Yes.
Doing interviews with her, even though she exposes what's going on in Syria, debunks anti-Russia conspiracy theories, exposed the Epstein criminal network, and yet, apart from Graham Elwood, apart from Graham Elwood, you guys, and Consortium News, I just don't see her on the best left-leaning outlets. So
Yes.
with all that being said, and the Great Reset, what's the end game? Is this really is this just like the beginning of the end of existence as we know it? And what can we do to actually push back against all of this? Because we have our work cut out for us.
Yeah. I mean, it's like the window is very much close to being completely bolted shut of, action we can do. But I mean, it's hard because I really do try to be positive about this, and because that's one of the things that helps, at least that helps to keep people going, is that little core of hope. But I do also struggle with anxiety, so it's that just makes it even harder to be positive personally. But I mean, yeah, I'm with you on that too. I think the state that we're in now is just a very bleak one. Um, and then as well, it's the surveillance state is just so massive, and it's they have years and history of knowing exactly how movements and activists work. So they know all this, and they already have structures in place set up to either destroy or co-opt those movements. So it's really downing to think of that as well. But I mean, at the same time, I do think people mentally are waking up a lot more than they did earlier. And there is definitely, regardless of how co-opted things get, there really is a genuine energy out there to kind of try and overhaul this system in some way and really make a change. So I think as long as that energy is there, then we can kind of use that energy to really make a change that doesn't get funneled back into the system, but that gets directed into overhauling the system. So I mean, that's what I try to do regardless, because regardless of what my mood is, I'm always going to keep fighting. But one of the things I always try to do is I try to go to these events that Black Lives Matter and Stop the Steal. I would go to both events, and I would talk to people who had that energy of wanting to change the system, and I would just let them know, at at all costs, don't play into this system. Be aware of all the co-option at play. Be aware that you can't trust any of the leadership because the leadership is likely going to get co-opted. Be aware that you have to be able to unite with anyone, and just having people aware of the true history of like not only this country as a whole, but the history of the surveillance state. So there's that understanding that you can't put too much faith in one figure or one movement and opt for a more decentralized approach. And, you know, as well, one of the things I would talk to them as well about is Julian Assange, obviously, and then kind of tying that into the greater fight against the national security state and really trying to get people to work with whoever, whatever person or activist is in front of you and try to band collectives of people together to really build numbers and just stand up against this growing tide of surveillance coming from a dying system, really. Because that's another thing that gives me hope is this whole system, this whole empire really is dying. That's why they're rolling out stuff like the Great Reset and Op Warp Speed. And that's why they're so desperately trying to censor people. It's because they're trying to cover for the fact that the empire is dying. So having that knowledge of the failed state in mind, use that to keep going and finally overhaul the system.
That was actually a very optimistic note.
Yeah, I tried to end it pretty optimistic there.
Wow, Glory, that was actually a very, very optimistic note. Well, alrighty, I think we'll end it there, and I will also just say to people that if look back at the uprisings to George Floyd, and just remember that if you want to defund the police or reallocate funds to the police and have community control over the police, you cannot be for that and give more powers to the deep state in the name of fighting fascism. Do not fall for that, because do not fall for that BS. And again, you cannot be against the police brutality that happens in your own country of America, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and Britain, and still be supporting, militarism overseas, because that's, the police on steroids. And exactly, and of course solidarity for Julian Assange. So on that note, we were joined on this edition of 1+1 with Miss Glory Jones, co-host and contributor to Slow News Day. I'm gonna link to the YouTube page of Slow News Day, and if people want, they can check it out. They should check you guys out. And Miss Jones, we definitely have to have you back on the show, because there's so much other topics that we could get into. But yeah, I'll definitely have you back on again to do that. All right. So thank you very much, and it was real honor to have you on.
Thank you.